Trek Profiles Podcast, episode 54, recorded March 2021. This is the Trek Profiles Podcast, where each episode we sit down with a Star Trek fan. We hear their story and we try to figure out why this show means so much to them, to us, and to all of you. I'm John, your intrepid host of this whole enterprise, and I welcome you to this, the Trek Profiles Podcast, episode 54. If you wish to get in touch with us, you can reach us at feedback@trekprofiles.com or on Facebook or Twitter at TrekProfiles. Spoiler warning, people, as we record this, we have reached the end of Season 3 of Star Trek Discovery, so all previous Trek content up to and including that point is fair game and may be discussed during this episode. You have been warned, humans. As always, my trusty sidekick and co-host is the extremely fastidious, stoically serious, and yet never perfidious M5 Multitronic unit. Greet the listeners, M5.
The M5 awaits instructions.
M5, let's do the announcements.
M5 will comply.
This podcast is an independent show. If you'd like to support us, the best way to do that is to follow us wherever you get your audio. We are on all the major platforms, and your following us helps other Trek fans find us. If you've listened to Star Trek podcasts for any period of time, you have to be familiar with the MissionLog podcast, hosted by John Champion and Norman Lao. Norman is my guest on this particular episode. Now, just like me, Norman is not only a huge Star Trek fan, but he also loves that sci-fi show from the 90s called Babylon 5. So we have a special announcement. You are getting a double feature. You're getting this regular Trek Profiles episode, and the very next one after this will be another recording with Norman in the same format as this show, but focusing on Babylon 5. We're going to call it Lurker Profiles, which is a B5 fan reference if there ever was one. So you have that to look forward to, and if B5 doesn't interest you, that is okay. Feel free to skip it. Now, there are some lightly edited outtakes and bonus material at the end of this episode after the ending audio cards, so you can enjoy them or not, as you choose. But I must say that we did talk quite a bit about the next recording and some of that material, so what I decided to do was to take the bonus material that was really B5 related, Babylon 5 related, and I'm going to stick that into the next episode. So there's plenty of bonus material in this one. I just took out any of the B5 stuff, really, and just put it in the next one, just to kind of keep the content somewhat organized for all of you. So you got that to look forward to as well. And also, I feel like I want to preempt any questions on this. So this is not a new show that I'm launching, and I'm not going to be doing stuff like this often. This really is just a one-off and just for funsies. So don't get any ideas out there, folks.
This is a Star Trek show. Return to the correct topic immediately.
Quite right, M5, quite right. Let's get back to the topic at hand. Let's do the Kobayashi Maru feedback. These are the results from episode 51 with Jeff Aiken. Now, on that episode, I asked Jeff 5 multiple choice questions, and he gave me his answers, and then I tweet those out as questions on Twitter as polls, where you can all have your say. So here are the results. I asked Jeff 15,000 quatlus or 3 slips of latinum. Jeff picked the latinum, and so did all of you by 75 to 25%. Next question, choose your permanent cosplay, Trill spots, or Vulcan ears. Jeff logically picked the Vulcan ears, but a majority of the Twitter poll people wanted the Trill spots by 57 to 43%. Next question, would you rather watch Mirror Universe episodes or time travel episodes? Time was the clear winner here, selected by both my guest and the poll respondents by 66 to 34%. And next question, I think this is question 4. Would you rather be Barclay's counselor or Neelix's taste tester? Now, Jeff very much preferred the Barclay's counselor job, but that was not the choice of the Twitter people who went for Neelix's taste tester by an astonishing 81 to 19%. Wow. And finally, question 5. Who is more terrible, the crazed historian John Gill or the nefarious collector Kivas Fajo? Jeff picked Fajo, but I expected the Twitter poll, honestly, to be lopsided. I expected Gill to be picked heavily, but I was mistaken. Favo was selected as the more terrible of the two by 68 to 32%. That's it for messages and announcements. Let's move on. M5, let's run the intelligence profile for this week's guest, and let's start the show.
Commencing transmission.
His favorite human is that OG Captain James T. Kirk, but he's also a Cardassian fan in general, and Garrick in particular. His favorite ship is the NX-01 refit, a very deep cut, and he's currently rewatching Deep Space Nine and getting into Voyager. He's currently in Gainesville in the Florida sector, North America Earth, in Sector 001. It's one of the hosts of the wonderful MissionLog podcast, which you should all subscribe to if you do not. It's Norman Lao. Welcome, Norman, and thanks for being on the podcast.
Oh, it's my pleasure, John. Thank you for having me. It is my honor to be here.
Well, you certainly signed up for a lot of honor because we are doing a twofer, are we not?
We are. Shall I spoil it or shall you spoil it?
No, you can talk about it. I mean, we're not gonna get into the content, but you can certainly let people know what I've induced you to engage in.
Well, John has been so gracious to offer me not only this particular recording, but we are going to be doing another recording based on our shared fandom of Babylon 5, of which I think many MissionLog listeners are maybe a little tired of hearing me drop every once in a while on a show.
Well, it pleases me to no end as a listener, Norman. So as far as I'm concerned, you have my vote to continue all the Babylon 5 references you want. So that's right, listeners. We are going to be doing basically a Trek Profiles show, but about Babylon 5, and Norman is going to come back as part 2 for that. So that is not going to be a new podcast. It's not going to be a new thing I'm going to be doing routinely. It's like a one-off special. I just have to get all the B5 love out of my system, and Norman has agreed to help me channel all that constructively into like a special podcast for you. Now, my plan is to actually get this episode out and then have that one be the immediate one following. That's the plan. It may change, but that is my plan. So listeners, as you are listening to this, you may have another episode coming to you very shortly of a slightly different flavor. So look forward to that. But we're not here to talk about Babylon 5. Oh no. We are here to talk about Star Trek, and the M5 is already very cross with me that I have not asked you question 1, Norman, which is, are you a Star Trek fan?
Through and through. Absolutely.
Do you recall how Star Trek came into your life?
Well, I actually shared this on an episode of MissionLog when John was interviewing, and I guess Rod was interviewing me at the same time. They asked, what is your fondest memory, your first memory of Star Trek? And I said it was a painful memory. And it actually literally was, because my dad sat me down in front of the TV and we were watching an episode of the animated series, I believe, and he was trying to yank gum out of my hair. And he was using the old peanut butter method where you would slather peanut butter on the gum to try and have the oils kind of like loosen it up so you can pull it out of your hair. Well, that, how pain sometimes can linger as a memory. Well, that just lingered. And I would love to say specifically that I was watching Yesteryear, but now that's just in my own headcanon. But I know it was an episode of the animated series because I remember it was a cartoon.
And how old were you at the time approximately?
I must have been 5 or 6. Yeah.
And do we want to inquire as to how the gum got in your hair?
I'm sure that I was doing something incredibly irresponsible, like not chewing it. And my mom told me that I was really kind of like an orally fixated child. I would just eat buttons. I would chew gum. I would stick random things that terrified them, like, I don't know, jacks or marbles or something like that. Maybe that's where I developed my particular way of speaking. I have a slight little bit of a lisp, but I try and overcompensate that with great editing.
Wonderful. So you had this shocking moment of watching TAS while your hair is being yanked on. Mm-hmm. And I guess you decided to continue watching TAS at that point, or did you just start watching more shows with your dad, or what happened next?
Well, as a younger kid, I wasn't really in the in crowd, so to speak. Mm-hmm. I grew up in Alliance, Ohio, and I pretty much lived most of my childhood in my parents' basement. I know this sounds like a cliche or a stereotype of a fandom fan, especially science fiction and especially Star Trek. But the affiliate, WUAB Channel 43 in Canton, Ohio, they ran Star Trek on Saturdays and Sunday evenings, and I would go out and play basketball. My brother is the sports baller. I'm the nerd. So I would watch Star Trek, the original series. I would watch Battlestar Galactica, Buck Rogers, Doctor Who on PBS, and that would be my block of time where I would be myself. I would be in my element. I would be safe. A lot of our fandoms they come from a point of comfort and safety and reliability. So these were, for all intents and purposes, these were my friends that I was visiting, on a weekly basis. And I came to depend on them because they were heroes to me. They were my childhood icons. As you said at the beginning of the show, James T. Kirk, and William Shatner, to be specific, there was a point in time where we actually never had to say that before. Do you realize that?
Yeah.
Not to disparage Chris Pine, but I was supposed to say Christopher Pike. My God, we're going to get into a long show. But yeah, there was one point in time where, it was just William Shatner. And for me, he will always be Captain Kirk. And they were our heroes. They were, or at least my heroes. And they were a point of great inspiration to me. When I was growing up, I was, 8, 9, 10. 10 years old is when I had my very, very first, probably most memorable and most impactful Star Trek memory that lives with me to this day. It's not an episode memory. No, it was The Wrath of Khan, 1982.
Tell me all about it.
And so I was born in 1972, so 10 years old, I'd be 1982. And my memory of this actually started a week before I actually saw The Wrath of Khan, because a week prior to that, my dad sent myself, my brother, and 2 of our friends at the time to Oberlin Tennis Camp in Oberlin, Ohio. And my dad, I was not as mature to handle the distance as my older brother was. And my dad gave me this digital watch. It was like a Space Invaders digital game watch.
Okay.
And it was, it was very, very simple, but it meant the world to me because it was a gift that my dad gave me. And he said, take care of it. I only buy you the best stuff, but I get it for you once. So take care of it. Well, the entire time, that was kind of like my goal, to get through the week and to see my dad and say, hey, look, Dad, my watch is still pristine. It's still mint condition. An OCD quality that still haunts me to this day, but I digress. So the very day that my dad came to pick us up, I took my watch off. I put it by the net poles, on a tennis court, and we were playing doubles. And for some strange reason, one of the guys we were playing against, he dove and landed on my watch and cracked the screen in half. I was devastated, absolutely devastated. And I just feel like, if I told my dad this, there was this wave of disappointment that would come over him. And that's not the way I wanted to see him when he came to pick us up. But when I told him about it, he knew how upset I was. And he said, you know what, let's go downtown. We'll go get some ice cream and we'll cheer you up. But we took a turn into a movie theater and he took me to go see The Wrath of Khan.
Oh.
And it was just him and me, my brother, my mom, and the rest of the family. They went shopping, but my dad knew that this was coming out. I didn't know that he knew I loved Star Trek that much. So it was just my dad on my right-hand side and me. And it's probably one of my fondest memories of Star Trek that I hold dear to this day. And it's one of the reasons why Wrath of Khan is my favorite Star Trek film. Actually, it's my favorite film of all time. And partially because of that memory, because it's something that's special that my dad and I had together.
Oh, that's glorious, Norman. It's really wonderful. And it actually reminds me of an experience I had actually not too long ago as we record this. I want to say maybe 2 years ago, approximately. That's just a guess. They re-released Wrath of Khan in movie theaters. I think Fathom Events did a thing.
Yes, they did.
And I brought my son. And so he and I watched it together in the movie theater. And of course, I had to explain everything. I was like, that's the Enterprise, and here's this, that, the other thing. And part of me was wondering like how all this sits in like an 11-year-old kid's head in 2020 or 2019, how they take all that in. Because for me as a kid, right, it was like the most amazing thing of all time. But I imagine times have changed. So I'll have to have him on Trek Profile someday far in the future, and he can explain that to me. But what a glorious memory. So it sounds like you chose to keep up with Star Trek as you were a kid and going into your teenage years. Now, sometimes I hear on the show that people tell me that their fandom sort of waxes and wanes over time. Did that ever happen to you, or were you fairly consistent in watching it and keeping up with all the Trek as you moved around and did all the things that young people do and move around the country and go to colleges and so forth?
Well, I was pretty consistent about it. I think it's something that, as long as I could find it, I would find a way to watch it, whether it would be, say, in high school, because I was in high school in 1986 to 1990, and we didn't have TVs there. We didn't even really have a common room. But every once in a while, we would go out, to a friend's house off campus, and then I would try and find a way to, abscond some time for myself and look at their TV guide. That's right, kids. There was a thing called a TV guide, and it told you local listings of local stations and where to find the shows that you want to watch. no internet at that time. So
That's
I would
right.
try and find some Star Trek to watch, if any. So around 19, I mean, so this is pre The Next Generation. So I'd still be trying to find the original series on syndication. And it was very hit or miss, but I always loved Star Trek, and I always kept my magazines with me. I still have all of my movie magazines from The Wrath of Khan all the way to Star Trek 6. Starlog used to put out these special magazines for the movies, and I would bring them along with me because if I couldn't get Star Trek, at least I would be able to have it somewhere along the line with me in my library somewhere. So when it came to college, that was a little different because Paramount put out those very, very nice looking home video cassettes that had, I think, 2 episodes on them, and you could get them from a subscription. So I could just have them mailed to me in college, and every month I would get one, and that was like the best day of the month because I would get my new Star Trek episodes, and I would unwrap them, and I would find 3 or 4 friends that were really into it, and we would go into our VHS machines. Yes, kids, we played those on magnetic tape and watched.
Did you have a top loader or a front loader?
We had front loaders at the time, but my very first VCR of any kind was a Betamax top loader. It was clunky. It was antique. It was awesome. And I wish I still had it in some fashion. But having the access to a VHS and being able to record Star Trek, and this was The Next Generation now locally from, that would be Channel 11. That's WPIX, I believe it's up in upstate New York.
That's New York City, bro.
Okay, so that's New York City. Yep. But I was able to get it in upstate New York.
Yes.
Yeah. And we were able to watch most of the 1990. I was in college, so 90 to 94. So most of the end of Next Generation, and then the beginning of Deep Space Nine. But I'll be honest with you, John, that's when I didn't really follow it all that much because another show came on the air somewhere around the same time. It started in February of 1993, and it captured my attention like no other show has before or since, and that was Babylon 5.
Oh, great. And so that sort of sucked up your TV watching time. You were sucked into the Army of Light, and off you went.
Well, I only had so much of my friend's TV that I could command, because it was his TV, and when he wanted to watch Star Trek, he could watch Star Trek. But when I could get in, squeeze in some Babylon 5, which was really hard to find because it bounced around all types of networks all the time. But then Deep Space Nine kind of went through its 7 seasons, of which I didn't really watch. I watched some of the highlight episodes, but I didn't really watch it in episodic form, certainly not in weekly form. And then Voyager came out, and that's when I moved to California towards the end of the 90s, and then I restarted my entire fandom with Enterprise from 2001 to 2005. And that captured my attention. That reignited my fandom with Star Trek all over again until it was gone. And then not until 2009 did we get something new. But I did watch the movies. I went to every single movie in the theater opening day, from Star Trek 2 all the way to Nemesis.
Wonderful.
So I was able to do that.
So since we're roughly the same age, Norman, I want to ask you about this sort of moment in sci-fi fandom that you experienced, and I want to see if you had the same experience that I did. When Babylon 5 came out, there was this feeling among general sci-fi fans that there was really only room for one good sci-fi show on TV, and that it was a zero-sum game, and that you weren't really allowed to like both. Because the idea was like, if you like one show, that's viewers that really belong to the other show. And so it seemed like there was this discourse that you had to pick a side, right? And you couldn't just love all the things. And I find that in a comparison to today, when we have so many high quality sci-fi shows, fantasy shows, that there's sort of an embarrassment of riches. When we go back to when we were thinking about this in the 90s, right, there was like very little that was out there, right? There was Star Trek, 1 or 2 other little things here and there, but nothing like there is now. Right. And so it was really this peculiar moment when people felt that there was this scarcity mindset in sci-fi. That was my experience. I'm curious if you experienced that too.
Well, it was similar because I agree that there were like these great tentpole fandoms. There was, well, first of all, even before Babylon 5 came out, there was always the great, the great controversy between, are you a Star Trek fan or are you a Star Wars fan? And that was, we remember those days.
That's like saying, you can either learn transmission repair or be a beauty queen. Like these two things, they have nothing, they're not exclusive.
Exactly.
You can do both, you can do either.
Or DC and Marvel, there was only the two, or you're a DC fan, you're a Marvel fan. So when you have a little bit of that scarcity, you get protective of it. You become very defensive of what you love. And it wasn't nearly as prevalent back then because I think that fandom wasn't as critical of everyone else's opinions about their fandom because there wasn't really that much to go around. But even when Star Trek started to go into its subsequent spin-offs like The Next Generation and Deep Space Nine and Voyager, there were so many fans that were concentrated in one tentpole fandom that anything outside of that couldn't possibly be of any kind of quality. And I understand where they're coming from because Babylon 5 was, it was very visually jarring in a way.
Yeah, it was very different.
It didn't look like Star Trek. It didn't look like the great Herman Zimmerman's, design line through that he did with every single iteration from The Next Generation to the end of Enterprise. That has a very visual structure and it's very comfortable for people so that you can slip inside that galaxy very easily. But when anything that challenge that comes into the viewpoint of other fans, are like, why are you watching that? It is lesser than what is already out there. And I've always found this interesting, and a point of concern with Star Trek fans is that Star Trek is a philosophy of being able to embrace other ideas and other, IDIC, infinite diversity and infinite combinations. But when you act antithetically to that philosophy, what is Star Trek saying to these fans of then and today when they are disparaging people about their fandoms? I always thought that it would be interesting to embrace other people's fandoms, to learn about other people's so-called, not so-called, but supposed culture. If you want to use culture and fandom, it is the same meaning. And that's always something that it just disappointed me when fans in Star Trek, they reached that point to become critical and in a way almost combative, especially online. And I just... I hope that trend changes as more and more and more of these high quality productions come out, because there's room in this playground for everybody, of every mindset, of every of every stripe. At the end, it's what we watch that inspires us to be better people is what's most important. It doesn't matter what it is, and it's great that it's Star Trek because Star Trek, that promotes that philosophy. But if it's not improving your life, improving your overall outlook of who we're supposed to be, then why are we watching it in the first place?
I've struggled very hard to have this abundance mindset in everything I do. In work, is really where I first started to become aware of this as a very young person. And sometimes we come across those people that feel like, well, if Norman does a great job on a project and someone says Norman did a great job, well, then that means that Sam isn't getting any love or attention because Norman got recognized, right? Mm-hmm. And that shows these people that have the scarcity mindset. And I think it's really a good idea to try to embrace a mindset of abundance, right? That there's enough positivity in the world, there's enough room for things that we can have space for all of these different things to flourish and grow, right? And the example I always like to give is, if you have a kid and then one day, right, the magic happens and a second kid's on the way, you don't sit down with the first kid and have a conversation that says, we have wonderful news, child. A second one is on the way. So therefore, we will be reducing our love for you by 50%. To shift that love to the second child, right? This is not a conversation that people would have, right? We all know that there's infinite amounts of this, right? Yeah. There's infinite love, right? I hate to be a little too woo-woo about it, but I really believe this stuff. And so there's this, in a small way, that's true in fandom, right? Is that there can be an infinite amount of appreciation for anything of quality, and one good thing doesn't have to crowd out the other things. It's a smaller example of this bigger concept, but I think it's really true.
Well, it's not a zero-sum game, John. I mean, it's not a zero-sum game. It's not about this wins and that loses. I think that if we adopt that mindset as fans, then we shut ourselves off to the possibility of enjoying other things that we would never even consider enjoying. If it weren't for my belief and trying to emulate the philosophy of IDIC, then I would never watch Babylon 5 in the first place. And then that itself wouldn't have opened me up to other things like Blake 7 or Space 1999 or other fandoms that have been so important to me. It just in terms of fulfilling something in my life that I need, that ability to connect with that inner joy that helps me go through life. If we don't connect with that, then we're really doing ourselves a disservice. And if we are consciously doing that, if we are consciously saying that, no, we do not accept other things that make our lives, enhance our lives to be better, then I think that you're doing yourself a great disservice as a human being. And isn't that what some of our favorite characters in Star Trek were all about? Trying to find those ways to overcome these obstacles that prevent them becoming more human? Data, Spock, Seven of Nine. These are characters that are learning, and they are doing it either intelligently or painfully, maybe both at the same time, but they are finding these ways to overcome those obstacles, those closed-minded mindsets that prevent them from developing themselves as better human beings, or what they understand as being what they want to be more of, and of this greater human tapestry of emotional connectivity and sensibility and sensation and knowledge. If we don't do that, then I feel that Star Trek hasn't really spoken to you in the way that it should have.
Let's pull the camera back then for a second on that, Norman, because you just went through a slew of shows. You talked about Blake 7. You talked about Space 1999. I've actually, as we record this, I recently watched just a couple of episodes of Space 1999, which I hadn't watched in a long time, and I actually quite enjoyed them. But what is it about sci-fi generally that seems to appeal to you? Because that's all the examples you've given me so far. So there must be something about sci-fi in general that really speaks to you.
Well, I think that it's the challenge of humanity to try and find more meaning about itself. I mean, that's the great Gene Roddenberry axiom, the human adventure is just beginning. And maybe that in science fiction, we've accepted the fact that humanity has become limited in its understanding either of itself or just the adjacent world around it. But it's as far out as humanity is going in science fiction, the further away from Earth that you get, the more culture and more understanding of one's own species you actually start to understand and learn, or maybe even are reintroduced to. Because for the most part, in science fiction, alien beings are a reflection or an analog of our greatest either fears or critiques or desires or things about us that we don't appreciate or very much like about ourselves. We don't have the fortitude or the wherewithal to be able to turn that microscope on ourselves, because in doing so, it's kind of like being the philosophers of old. How can anything aside from our sun be the center of the universe? So once we take ourselves out of that equation and look at ourselves from that perspective, we see that we have not even remotely unlocked the question about ourselves, the enigma that is humanity, until we see it in other beings of where we can criticize. Take the Ferengi, for example. How can we take a look at ourselves as a decaying capitalist state, but we can see it in the Ferengi and make that identification? So that's something I've always found interesting about science fiction, is that the further out you go, the more questions that are pointed back at humanity. And I think that can only really be done in that fantastical way that's science fiction.
Let's take a look at your Star Trek consumption overall. As we record this, it's late in March in 2021. Out of the roughly 800 hours of Star Trek, what percentage do you think you've seen?
I would probably say roughly 78.92%.
What are you missing?
What am I missing? Well, I'm missing the back half of season 6 and season 7 of Deep Space Nine, which I'm doing on MissionLog, and now seasons 5.5 through 7 of Voyager, and I think that's it. I have seen all of Enterprise. I used to do a podcast for Trek FM called Warp 5 on Enterprise. I have seen, for the most part, all of the movies, although I need to revisit some of those. I am not well-versed, or at least I can't mentally command my instant recall for, say, Insurrection and Nemesis. And let's see, I've seen a majority of the fan films. Are we considering are we lumping fan films in here too, or just?
Well, I was thinking canonically, but if you want to speak on it, you're more than welcome to.
Books. I am a horrible reader. I'll be the first one to admit it. So I'm not a novel reader as much as I should be, reading things like Yesterday's Child, things of that nature. Some of the tentpole novels. Comics, I've read a lot of the Star Trek comics. I love reading any Star Trek technical manual, whether it's the original Franz Joseph technical manuals or the legendary maroon cover Mike Okuda and Rick Sternbach technical manual. But for the most part, I think just in terms of the licensed, quote unquote, licensed canonical Star Trek, I'm pretty caught up with pretty much everything. I have seen all of Discovery. I have seen all of, the one season of Picard, Lower Decks, and all of the shorts. So I think I'm close.
Obviously, you're signed up for MissionLog, so you're definitely going to watch all of it at some point, yeah?
All the way up to Enterprise, and then there are obviously plans to do hopefully more in the future. But that's, let's see, it took Ken Ray and John Champion 7.5 years to get to the third season of Deep Space Nine. So I did all of seasons 4, and then will continue to the end of 7. And then do Voyager all 7 seasons, and then Enterprise all 4 seasons. The Great Maker willing, the Great Bird of the Galaxy willing. And then I do believe we're also going to do the movies along the way. So we're going to be doing 2009, Into Darkness, and Beyond. And then we do the current shows on MissionLog Live, but it's very well possible that we might do a MissionLog format for those as well.
So you're committed to becoming a completist at some point anyway?
As much as I can be, yes. I still have a few miles left in the tires, so I think I can get there sometime.
Good. Well, I want to talk about your involvement with MissionLog, but first I want to understand your fandom parameters, I think, a little more carefully. When was that? Now, we have actually met in person at STLV. I think actually I remember your very excellent Tantalus Colony cosplay. I think was the first thing I actually noticed. And if you have a picture of yourself in that, I will put it up on the show notes page up at TrekProfiles because this is a fantastic cosplay.
I will get you one for sure.
Yeah. I appreciate that. So anyway, so we had met at a Star Trek convention. So I know you've been to them. What was the first sci-fi or Star Trek convention that you'd ever been to?
Star Trek STLV 50.
Nice.
That was my very first Star Trek convention. And not to say that I haven't been to conventions where they have featured Star Trek, but that has been my first official convention, my first official creation convention. And I wanted to do it because I brought my best friend with me on that for that convention, because he too has never been at a Star Trek convention, and we met because of Star Trek.
Oh, well, you have to tell me that.
So when I was in college, Paramount actually put out some videotapes of some of the episodes. They never put them out in order. So I do believe that I had Arena playing in my dorm room. And neither he or I was actually watching it in a friend's room because I didn't have a VCR. My friend had a VCR. So I was watching Arena in his room. And then there was a party going on. And this guy walked by this room and he said, "Hey, man, are you watching Star Trek?" I'm like, "Yeah, you want to watch?" He's like, "Oh, yeah," because his mom is a huge Star Trek fan.
Oh, nice.
So he walked by my room. We're watching Arena. We were having a few laughs, having a few beers. And then we had, there was a fire drill. Everyone went outside. It was freezing cold. It was probably sometime in December or January. And I was having a cigarette and then he was having a beer outside and we just hit it off. So my best friend, Todd, shout out to my best friend, Todd, of which many people may have met at that convention. Tall, blonde guy. He was actually cosplaying Commodore Matt Decker from his favorite episode. Was it The Doomsday Machine?
Nice.
And we had the time of our lives. It's one of those indelible memories that I will always have and always be grateful for that being able to happen.
So what was your impression of your very first Star Trek convention? What did you expect and what did it turn out to be for you?
Well, interesting thing is I didn't really expect much. I mean, I expected to see some cast members like walking up and down the hallway, which I did. I think that the thing that really just struck out to me was just the sheer amount of like positive energy that was, I mean, it was palpable. I mean, you could like walk around with a spoon and just like eat, airfuls of positive energy. And that's something that I've always wanted to be surrounded by. I've always wanted to be surrounded by just this vibration, there's this electricity in the air that everyone is there for the exact same purpose. And that's to celebrate Star Trek, unabashed, unapologetically in the way that they want to do it, whether they're screen accurate cosplaying or irreverently in their own way, doing fun things with the creativity and just being there in the moment, being present, and respecting everyone's passion for this property that has taken me so far in my life in one way or another. And I wanted to do it with my best friend because he and I, we survived a lot together on Star Trek through good times and bad times. And I know that that's very meaningful and very similar in a lot of people's lives too. We are a merry band of brothers, if you will, that celebrate this fandom because of not only how it shaped our lives, but how it brought so many meaningful people into our lives too. And that's something that can't be discounted. That's how we as human beings evolved, by allowing people to enter our lives. And this was the doorway for that to happen for many people, especially me.
And so you decided to continue going to conventions after that, obviously.
I did. I didn't go to the next convention. I went to the convention after that in Las Vegas, that would have been 2018. And that's where I saw you again there, I believe.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah. And I wish I could go to more conventions. Unfortunately, COVID was, it kind of rained on my parade, because 2020 was supposed to be my official announcement coming out, co-host of MissionLog, interview panel party.
It was your debutante ball.
That was my debutante ball. But you know what? As long as people stay safe and as long as the conventions are done in a responsible way, I can wait. I would rather have you people be just safe out there and secure, and we could all see each other again down the road.
Wonderful. So we talked about the fact that you've worn that wonderful Tantalus cosplay. What have you done any others?
So I have some photos I can share with you, but my favorite deep cut is the Governor Corey cosplay. And I think it's just because rarely, if ever, do you actually see Asian characters of any significant note, even main cast, on Star Trek, because that's Star Trek sometimes, and I understand that. But when Key Luke played Donald Corey in Whom Gods Destroy, and when I saw that costume available, I'm like, well, I'm going to play this up to the hilt. I'm going to use my ethnicity, and I'm going to do as much as I can with this costume. And I'm just shocked that people just pulled me over in the hallway and just said, "You're kidding! I don't I don't understand like how someone said something very nice. It said, I don't understand how someone as young as you could understand this character from so long ago. I'm like, I'm not that young. I'm just Asian. We play it being young. But no, it was great to do that because I have a TOS, standard uniform tunic, command color. And I was at a bar once for a Halloween party and someone walked up to me and was like, oh, you must be Sulu. I'm like, must I be? Because I'm Asian in this costume, but that's their association. I don't blame them for that. That's just their,
right.
Kind of like just their assumption of a Star Trek character that's Asian from the original series. But I also did a standard formal uniform with all of the proper accoutrement, including my my Axanar leaf from the Treaty of Axanar.
So a TOS era.
A TOS era, yes, TOS era formal uniform. One of my favorites, though, because we were on our little small shuttlecraft together, was my Enterprise jumpsuit.
Nice.
Every single time that I ran into somebody wearing an Enterprise jumpsuit, we just hit it off because there wasn't a lot of love for Enterprise. So when you see somebody outwardly doing that in a cosplay, wearing the NX-01 ball cap and, having even like a phaser or a tricorder, hard to find stuff, we instantly just kind of bonded because we knew that we're on a very small island together, but we'll make the most of it. And, and it was just great. A lot of love for Enterprise. You see them and you're like,
it's my people, right?
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
my people.
Yeah. Let's see. My other favorite cosplay this is a deep cut one because not a lot of people got this, but not everyone, but most TOS fans or deep cut Star Trek fans know that there was an inconsistency with the chest insignia on the uniforms in the original series.
Yes.
Commodore Decker had one for the Defiant. And my favorite one was from an episode called The Omega Glory. That was the chest insignia of the USS Exeter.
It's a rectangular one, right? Rectangular, yeah. Yeah,
with orbs on the inside of it. And when people stopped me, they're like, what ship is that? I'm like, this is the USS Exeter. This was Captain Ron Tracy's ship. I couldn't be Ron Tracy because I didn't fit the, kind of like the cultural criteria. So I made myself a Commodore because we never saw a Commodore of that ship. So I decided to go that route.
Very good.
What else did I do? I mean, I did a Next Generation uniform, and I have not done a Voyager jumpsuit, which I really want to do.
Nice. Well, then we got something to look forward to.
Yeah.
So have you a collection of anything Star Trek related, Norman?
I do have a nice set of Eagle Moss ships. Not all of them, but I do pick and choose very carefully because I like the XL size ship. So my favorite ship right now, that my most recent part of my collection is the USS Prometheus from Voyager's Message in a Bottle, which I think is amazing. And I wish that Eagle Moss made the multi-vector attack mode version of that ship, because that blew my mind when I saw that. I'm like, when I was watching that episode, I'm like, yeah. They're going to split apart Battle Bridge. Yeah. And then it like split into three. I'm like, what is going on? It's amazing. I do love the reimagined version of the USS Enterprise, the 1701 from Star Trek Discovery. That's Captain Pike's ship, or this Anson Mount's Captain Pike's ship. I have my favorite ship, as you said earlier, is the NX-01 refit by Doug Drexler. That is an exclusive to Eagle Moss and has not been seen on screen, only done in a computer-generated simulation. And it's gorgeous. It is the logical progression of the NX-01 with a secondary hull, so that it had stronger warp capability and an engineering base that it was able to generate further distance, further power, so that it could enter the Romulan War as the flagship of the Federation. That was the plan and hopefully it was the plan for season 5, but we never got there. So.
Right. Yeah. Oh, gosh. I mean, sometimes on the show, we always like to talk about these things that could have been, right? And I feel like that's one that's right up there for me. That's like a top 3 things I wish we had gotten in the show, but we didn't, because of whatever production reason. Yeah. But certainly something that I loved. Now, I have to tell you, Norman, that I have been going to STLV for quite a number of years. And I was actually in the room when John and Ken announced that they were doing a podcast called MissionLog. And the first episode is just about coming out now, and you should subscribe. And because I've been listening to podcasts since 2006, which is early days for podcasts. And so I was right there at the beginning. And I started watching along with MissionLog, trying to stay a few episodes ahead, watching, just so that I could have seen the episode before the podcast came out. And I enjoyed that, and I enjoyed listening to John and Ken. And then, of course, Ken decides to step away. And you, on your own, must have come to a decision that you were going to pursue being co-host on that show. What drove that decision? Tell me about it.
Well, funny thing is that I didn't make that decision at all. And I will caveat this with, I will be 100% honest with you, John. I wasn't even thinking about it. I wasn't even thinking about it at all. I didn't even know that Ken was leaving because I didn't follow MissionLog that intently. What happened was that I started a podcast, a Babylon 5 live cast with my friend Charlene Schmidt. She used to do True the Journey on Trek FM. And we were doing that for about a year. And then all of a sudden, I got a private message on Facebook from John asking me if I wanted to audition for the possibility of becoming the co-host for MissionLog. And my first reaction was, I'm not sure, because I wasn't sure if I wanted to do that. I wasn't sure if I wanted to take that commitment, because in doing some research after he asked me that, what Ken and John did was a serious commitment on a weekly basis to produce a very high quality show. And I wasn't any stranger to podcasting, but I was familiar with the current state of toxic fandom in the Star Trek community that comes to bear sometimes when people put themselves out there on podcasts or on any type of like creative endeavor. I'm not saying that's a terrible thing, because when you put yourself into the public space, you're bound to get your resistance. There are pockets of resistance that won't agree with what you say or how you say it, no matter how deliberate or how well constructed your critiques are. But at the same time, though, I said, why not me? What do I have to offer the Star Trek community that has not been said before? And I told John that, you know what? I haven't even watched Deep Space Nine. I haven't watched Voyager. My last series that in total that I've watched was Enterprise. I don't know what I have to offer the public that's worth their subscription to Patreon, worth their support, worth their time. And he said, it's because that you just told me this, and I think that you're a good candidate, that you don't have this longevity in those franchises where you can now bring a fresh approach and something that doesn't have a lot of history behind your opinion making, that it doesn't color the way that you're going to approach critiquing the show. And that has, to my credit, that has allowed me to see these episodes for the very first time in a very open-minded light, because I'm reacting to it as if I would see them for the first time. But it was a difficult decision to make because I knew what I was getting into. And yes, I have had my fair share of emails that have critiqued what I have said, disagreements that have really, only came from the angle of being disagreements. They weren't really constructive. And I do get some of that on social media. But for the most part, though, John and I are very proud of being able to stand by what we said, because every single episode that we structure has a very specific way of going about either discussing the accolades of the episode, critiquing what we didn't like, and how we feel that affects Star Trek as a fandom overall from the morals and meanings and messages standpoint. So I'm glad that I took that chance, but it wasn't an easy decision to make.
As we record this, I have an interview that I conducted with someone who works with Star Trek, or I should say in Star Trek in a way. In fact, as we record this, I think, the episode already came out. It was with Ben Robinson, of course, who does all the Eagle Moss stuff.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And one of the conversations that we had was, as a fan, it has to be difficult in a way to also now have Star Trek as a job. So the question I have for you, Norman, is do you feel that it affects your just plain old enjoyment of the show, that now you have a task list and a to-do list around it, and it sort of dictates how you have to watch the show, when you have to watch the show, what sort of things you have to look for when you watch the show, as opposed to just sitting down and thinking of your favorite episodes and throwing on some of the ones that just make you happy and watching them? I mean, it has to have affected your fandom in a way.
Not so much Deep Space Nine, and I can't speak to Voyager yet, but because I have to do it in a way where I'm looking at it critically, I think at this stage in the game, in my fandom, and for me as a person, it allows me to delve deeper into the meaning of the show. What am I watching it for, as opposed to, does it entertain me? Because it's Star Trek, I love Star Trek, and it will entertain me up to a point. But watching it for a very specific reason of trying to mine what they are trying to do narratively in the show, what point are they trying to get across that inspires you as a Star Trek fan, that's something that I've never really watched Star Trek for, per se. I've always watched it to enjoy myself. And it's not taking the enjoyment out of the way or away from it. It's just a different way of approaching it, as opposed to, well, that 60 minutes was entertaining. Now I can move on to the next thing. I think about the structure more, the narrative beats, the characterizations, the connective tissue, things of that nature more now, because I need to know if they make sense in future episodes, especially with the serialization of Deep Space Nine. And I've found some pretty interesting inconsistencies when it comes to the characterizations, because as a serialized show, those beats have to continue, whether it's 5, 6, 7 episodes down the line. If they don't do it in a natural progression or a logical conclusion, it does seem to detract from the characters' motivations and their evolution. And, you want your characters to grow. You want to grow with the characters. But if they do things in the story, or if the story itself doesn't make sense from that standpoint, it does tend to take you out of the universe and question, what am I really getting out of this anymore? Because it's not speaking to me in that sensibility of Star Trek.
Do you feel that there's some portion of the fan base that is getting their anti-Norman signs ready to go because they feel like you're not enjoying it appropriately or in the right way or enough? It sounds like you're having a somewhat negative experience as part of this.
Oh, no, not a negative experience. I'm just being honest. And, I will be on, forthcoming to say that some of the iTunes reviews that I've gotten for some of my shows have been less than stellar. Some of them have been, I think, a little too overtly critical. But at the same time, though, that's the deal, right? That's the deal of what you sign up with. And believe me, I have had nothing but probably the best Star Trek work experience, if you will, but the best Star Trek experience that I've had in recent years doing MissionLog, because first of all, doing it with John Champion, he and I have known each other peripherally ever since that I was a fan of his when he was doing DVD Geeks years ago. And we've always been friends since. We've always, seen each other on social media. And I've always just enjoyed his approach to any of the fandoms, especially, when we did, say, James Bond themed shows for the 602 Club on Trek FM, or shows that have to do with Man from U.N.C.L.E. or anything that has to do with the spy universe. So we connect on that level. But Yes, there have been, pros and cons to both sides of this equation, but I think that's just being realistic about what you're getting into. You're not going to get 100% buy-in from everybody because everyone sees things in their own particular way. And perhaps they listen to what I had to say on a bad day. Perhaps they're just so, they're so defensive about what they love that it just naturally comes off as being, antagonistic in their approach to responding to you. They don't mean it sometimes, and I certainly don't take it that way. But with social media, you never really know like the emotional content and intent that's behind the typing. You can't reason with that. It's very cold. It's very emotionless, and you only really draw out of it what you project into it. And I try not to project anything into it because they all have a right to say what they need to say. It's their opinion.
Wonderful, wonderful. Yeah, I was actually having a conversation with this about someone else on the show, which is sort of the cost of critique, right? And the issue came up actually talking about conventions. And if I go to a convention, a Star Trek convention in particular, and I'm a fan of this show and I do this particular cosplay, is that okay? Or am I going to get a hard time? And my response was no. No one's going to go to a convention to hate on you. People go to conventions to love it, right? And to celebrate it. And people are going to, if they're going to spend thousands of dollars, which is what it costs, to go to that, right? They're not there to bust chops and leave a trail of dead bodies behind them. They're there because they want to participate in things.
Right.
When you're on social media, critique is free and it's anonymous, right? So it brings sort of the worst aspects of humanity out. And Star Trek fandom isn't immune to that, right? It's going to be in any part of any worthwhile human endeavor is going to attract some people that have suboptimal attitudes in how they engage with it. And I think that's certainly something that happens on social media. I've had my own run-ins with that as well. And it's part of the gig.
Let me share. I'm sorry to jump in here, but I wanted to share a story with you about. So this was at Star Trek Las Vegas. I was wearing my on the 50th, and I was wearing my Enterprise uniform, and I was going through the vendor hall, and I was having a great time. It was just me. Todd was off doing something else, and just from the distance, I hear, "Star Trek Enterprise, man, that was great. Too bad season 3 sucked." And I go, okay, I can take this one of two ways. I can either talk to him about it, or I can just shoot him a sideways glance. So I decided to step up to him and talk to him about it. I'm like, would you mind explaining yourself? You obviously saw my uniform. You obviously understand what I'm wearing, but you called me over here in a very passive aggressive way. So let's talk about it. What exactly about Star Trek season 3 of Enterprise did you not like? And he started kind of hemming and hawing. I'm like, so let me ask you another question. And I want you to specifically tell me your feelings on the two-parter and what it did to Captain Archer between Azadi Prime and Damage. Can we expound on that? And then he goes, well, I'm like, and I looked at him and go, you never watched the series, did you? And he goes, to be honest with you, no, not really. And I go, then why did you say what you said? And he said, well, that's the going sentiment on social media. And I'm like, well, look, I understand that you have an opinion, but let's do ourselves a favor here. And if you want to talk to me about this, we can discuss this intellectually and rationally, and I can help you understand maybe some of the things that you don't like about Enterprise. If you're a Star Trek fan, I'd be more than happy to do that. But do yourself a favor and don't do that to fans, because all you're doing is drawing negative attention to yourself, and you're not going to engage into a discussion that could do both of you good. So why don't we just leave it at that? And I walked away.
I've told the story on the podcast before that I've done this Let That Be Your Last Battlefield cosplay. I don't know if you've ever seen the pictures of it.
Yes, I did. Yeah.
Yeah. And I
can't remember if you were Bella or Loki.
Oh, I was a follower of Loki.
Okay.
And the idea was like, I wasn't Loki, but I was one of his adherents. And so I had a protest sign, like Loki was framed, free Loki, and all this kind of stuff.
Oh, that's right.
And the whole thing was like, I would actually act the part, right? I actually just didn't dress up and walk around and be like, hey, look at me. But I wanted to actually portray the character, which I did. And I seem to have somehow attracted a small cadre of Simpsons comic book guys who would come up to me and say, this cosplay is unacceptable because this planet is entirely dead. This is the worst cosplay ever because all these people are dead and you cannot be that. And I was like, dude, just stop. Just stop right now. It's a make-believe show. Right. But that's what was going on in my head. I didn't break character because I thought that would be more fun. Mm-hmm. So I just pointed at the sign and grimaced and walked off. But I really was kind of amazed that people felt the need to come up to me and point out to me the inadequacy of my cosplay because my characters were all dead, when in fact they're all from a make-believe TV show. Right. I hate to break it to you, none of them actually existed to begin with. Yeah. You know, but hey, what are you going to do? Right. It was my momentary interaction with a real life simulacrum that came from The Simpsons. It was really unbelievable. There was a whole group of them. It was really amazing. So, Norman, I think we have talked about the parameters of your fandom. I think we should talk about some episodes. Are you down?
I am down. Let's do it.
As is my habit, the M5 came up with a list of episodes for us to talk about. And first on the list is one of my favorites, going right back to my childhood days. So I'm eager to talk about it. And I don't think we've talked about it too much on the podcast before. And that is TOS Balance of Terror, with the spectacular Mark Lenard as the Romulan commander. What about this episode is particularly powerful for you, Norman?
What I love about Balance of Terror is that Kirk is... He's in a position where I think for the very first time, he was doubting himself as a commander. You know, he was responsible for the lives of this crew. He's responsible for the actions that he has to take. He's responsible for possibly even violating treaty in the neutral zone. And there's this one specific scene, though, that still rings so true to me to this day. And I love how Kirk handled it. It's when Styles was looking at Spock. And he was irate, not outwardly though, but he knew that after seeing the Romulan commander and looking like a Vulcan, he transferred a lot of the hate that he had for Romulans because of what happened to his family onto Spock. And I loved it when Kirk said, you know, there's no room for bigotry on my bridge. Leave it in your quarters. And I said, this is how a starship captain handles his people. And it also addresses the fact that there still is bigotry in the 23rd century. It's just that the Federation, or at least in this case, Starfleet officers like Styles, were trained to try and suppress that, but it still exists. There's still racism in a sense. There's still bigotry in a sense. There's still sexism in a sense. There's still all of these isms that humanity has not gotten past. It's just that Starfleet has been better about trying to help their officers or their enlisted repress those baser parts of their personality. But I like the fact that they addressed it.
One of the points of that I really think is important to mention is something that we've been talking about recently on the show. It's been a theme that's come up in a bunch of episodes recently, which is that there's the Star Trek that sort of exists in people's heads, and there's the Star Trek that we actually see portrayed on screen. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of stuff that's floating around in the fandom about things that people say about the Federation or things people say about things that we see in the show, which aren't necessarily shown to us on screen. And I think this is a great example of that, you know, humanity has evolved to a point where we don't have these feelings anymore. What are you talking about? We see them in the show. They're there. People have them. Or when people say things like, the Federation, here's a big one for me. The Federation's a utopia. And sometimes they even qualify it with certain kinds of utopian and certain kinds of utopian societies. And one of the things I point out is that, well, then we have to explain things like, why are people constantly leaving utopia to go and hang out on all these planets and be settlers? Right? If it's so great, why is that happening? Mm-hmm. I don't really have an understanding of, you know, that this utopian society that's so wonderful, why people feel the need to go to Janus 6 and become miners, right? Which seems like a terrible place to live and a terrible life to have. Why would people want that if Earth is such a paradise? And so when you pay attention to the show as it actually exists on the screen, it gives you a very different perspective, and you really have to separate out sort of the things that we hear in the fandom and put a different kind of set of glasses on to really appreciate the show that way. And I think that Balance of Terror is a great example of that.
Yeah, almost in like an arena, you know, when Kirk is about to kill the Gorn and he doesn't, he holds off and saying that, you know, maybe we were encroaching on your space. And then the Metrons, they came out And they said that, you've illustrated the higher quality or the higher trait of mercy. So are you saying that this is not a merciful race anymore? That this is something that's uncharacteristic of humanity? Something that, this omnipotent power is giving you now a pass on because their omnipotence didn't see this in your species, in the human race anymore? So I always found that interesting. Like Kirk being the kind of like this base soldier. I mean, an errand of mercy says, I'm a soldier, not a diplomat. He's a warrior. Mm-hmm. And mercy is supposed to be part of this higher utopian philosophy of being a better human being, but it's still there. Those base instincts are still there. We're trying to overcome them, much like Spock is trying to overcome these baser urges of his humanity to try and go to the fully embraced Kolinar application of just pure logic and erase that part of his humanity. It's an interesting dichotomy that Star Trek, when it is at its best, really brings to the forefront. And I just loved that scene where he just says to Styles, you can't do this, man. This is not who we are. You can't do it, especially to one of the best officers of our fleet. So I thought that was very refreshing to see.
A great message that I think we can all get behind for sure. Now, talking about issues that might cause some things to go askew in the fandom, one of the big episodes that always comes up when people want to be controversial, TNG Chain of Command, Captain Jellicoe, hero or zero, right? This is sort of a conversation that's perennial among Star Trek fans, but I see that the M5 has selected it for us. And so there must be something interesting in this episode for you, Norman. What is it?
Well, I mean, I do love the fact that this is just one of those kind of like watershed episodes in Star Trek where you see, outright torture. You get to see kind of like what the Cardassians are a little bit more about. David Warner's Gul Madred is phenomenal in this episode, but that's not why I love this episode. I love this episode because it shows you a completely different officer in Starfleet that we're not used to. When Captain Jellicoe took command of the Enterprise, he put in place very strict and stringent disciplinary procedures that rubbed a lot of us the wrong way when we first saw it, I think. I think that I can speak for the most part for all of the fans. I think a lot of us were like, how dare you? How dare you, like, remove Livingston and put up these ridiculous illustrations from your son? Or grandson, I can't remember what it was. It was his son. Yeah, you removed all the personality from Picard's office. You told Troy to put on a uniform. You told Riker to do 3 duty shifts, 4 instead of 3.
4 duty shifts, yeah.
And I was like, who is this guy? And then I grew up. And then I understood that this man is responsible for every single life, civilian or otherwise, on this ship during this Cardassian negotiation. And if things go sideways, he needs a disciplined and very smoothly running ship in order to get them out of danger. And that's what he did. But Riker was a great analog for us because he was like, Starfleet doesn't need to be this way. Starfleet doesn't need to be this stringent. Starfleet doesn't need to be this, overbearing and unbending. But maybe it does. Maybe what we saw on the Enterprise was a luxury that particular ship, the flagship of the Federation, with its families, with its diplomats, with its goal of doing this greater mission to find and to bolster the relationships of the Federation. Maybe that has a luxury to it that other ships don't have, that Starfleet doesn't have. And Jellicoe, I think, is a prime example of this is a captain that exists within the Federation and within Starfleet that we are just not used to seeing. And I think that Ronnie Cox played it brilliantly. He wasn't unlikable. He was just different. And he was right because it was his command.
That's right.
And you had to, and if you are, I know that I've never been in the military, but I understand that military has discipline and military has procedure. And it's because of the discipline and the procedure that saves lives.
That's exactly right. I'm a veteran, and I had a much easier time with it than I think a lot of other people did. It's just because that's just how I saw things. But I think also, Picard drew a lot of love and a lot of respect among the fandom. So whoever they bring in to replace the guy is always going to be different And so it's always, he was set up to not be a likable character from the beginning, I think, just because of the fact that he was different.
Yeah.
I was listening to a podcast that was actually about Roman history. And it was this professor talking about what we know of ancient Rome. And he said it's a little bit like looking into a room through a keyhole, in that there are some things you can see incredibly clearly and you know all about them. There are some things you can only vaguely see the shape of, and there's some stuff you're just guessing at. And there's some things that are completely hidden from you that you have no knowledge of. That's what we know of ancient Rome. In spite of all the scholarship and in spite of all the efforts of historians and other people over years doing research over hundreds of years now, there's just parts of it we just don't fully understand. And I feel like that's actually a good way to understand the wider world of the Federation as seen through Star Trek, in that we've been looking through a narrow keyhole at sort of these Starfleet officers doing very Starfleet-y things. And there's a lot of other stuff that's going on in the world that we don't know anything about, but people have extrapolated based on this very small sample size of what you see on the bridge of the Enterprise or on the promenade of Deep Space Nine, and sort of come up with what the world is like from that. And I think that it's a little bit like looking through that keyhole. And it's actually one of the things I liked about the Picard show is that I felt like in a lot of ways it gave us a view that was much broader of the Federation, of what was actually happening sort of out there in the world than what we got in a lot of other episodes. And I really liked that.
But also what was going on in Starfleet. I know that there was a lot of criticism about the scene where he walked into Starfleet headquarters, and then I believe it was an ensign that was behind the desk, and he didn't recognize Picard.
That's right.
And people lost their minds on social media about that. But then when you take a step back and take a look at it, say, in real time, if a famous admiral, famous being a very, relative word, walked into a base and walked up to a desk and said, I need access and clearance to so-and-so, Ensign X would not know this person necessarily.
That's right.
And that's okay. He is not, there's an old axiom of, it's, it's not what have you done, it's what have you done for me lately? And what has Picard done for the Federation lately?
No, look, man, Norman, I can tell you, I was in the Navy, and I can tell you for a fact that the Chief of Naval Operations, who's the head Navy guy in all the Navy, none of the guys I worked with would have recognized him on sight. Nobody knew people could have spent some time and, looked it up in like the newspaper. So this is before the internet was really a thing, but he would have shown up and people wouldn't have known who he was. They might have recognized his name tag. Right. That's what they would have known the name, but they would not have known his face. Yeah. And this is the guy who was actively in charge.
Yeah, I'm sure he was walking around in uniform. They obviously would know the rank. They obviously would know his accolades, but Picard was civilian now.
Yeah, this is a retired guy. Yeah. He's out. That didn't bother me at all, but that's just my personal take on it. So let's move on and talk about an episode that I think is very powerful for you as an Enterprise fan. We'll see how you feel about it. And that's First Flight with the wonderful, wonderful Keith Carradine as A.G. Robinson.
Yeah.
So what's going on here in this episode, Norman? Now, I have to be very careful because I really just do want to do a little bit of stage setting in that I saw Enterprise in original broadcast. That was the last time I saw most of it. Okay. So I have been working my way through it, and I've been live tweeting the episodes as I've gone. So I have seen this episode, but it was a long time ago. And normally I rewatch all the episodes my guest wants to talk about. So for this one, I was like, ooh, I don't want to, because it's just a few ahead from where I am. I decided not to give it a watch, just because I wanted to keep it. It was just right there, a few episodes ahead of where I am. So I felt like I didn't want to jump ahead. So I want to know what about this episode was special to you. Tell me why I should look forward to it and what is special about it.
So almost in every format of a show, you'll eventually come to the soft origin episode. And this is what this episode is in Enterprise. It's the soft origin episode. And for me, it literally is it's almost kind of the pitch of what Enterprise Season 1 should have been, the entirety of Season 1. Because it starts off with Archer and T'Pol. They're investigating this, I think that's a nebula cluster or...
dark matter.
Dark matter cluster, thank you. And they're finding all of these anomalies that are happening. And Archer starts to reminisce about A.G. Robinson because he just got the news that A.G. Robinson died. And he was like, AG would have loved this. And then T'Pol just kind of kept encouraging him to talk more about his friend and how they were in the NX program together. They were both up for the captaincy. It just felt like that their story could have been the running story. This camaraderie, yet this competition between these two very strong, very capable, very sure officers that have been trying to one-up each other during the course of this entire program to get to fly the very first NX class starship. And that should have been the season finale. Who would have become the captain between AG and Jonathan Archer? And we know that Archer had that position at the beginning of Broken Bow. But there was this just great storytelling of not only these two, but then you had the origin of how Trip Tucker came to be, how Jonathan Archer was a little bit of a maverick. He actually busted rules because he wanted to get that second test flight out there. It was everything that you wanted Star Trek Enterprise to be, because it was reminiscent of the right stuff. It was reminiscent of kind of like, that Earth to the moon type feeling where, you know what, we have to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that the program works. And AG helped push Archer. Archer helped push AG. There just felt like there was a great foundation for a season-long story where perhaps AG and Sato worked together. That's why she was always this first pick of being communications officer. Somewhere along the line, Mayweather just did something that was beneficial to the NX-01 getting off because he was a boomer. You could flesh out a lot of those other characters, and they didn't get a chance to because they just went out into space to take, I keep telling him Zeus, but it's not Zeus. It was
Clang,
to Kronos. And I understand why they had to do that. I personally didn't really think it was the best way of going about introducing an entire cast so quickly. So it would have given it a chance to breathe. Maybe they wouldn't just kind of inserted a little bit of Malcolm Reed being part of Section 31 and having him join as TAC officer, because that's the reason how Section 31 was able to keep tabs on the NX-01 as he reported in from time to time. So there was, and of course, you would able to flesh out a little bit more of the temporal Cold War and how that fit in. So I think that first flight was just a proving ground, or was a really great pitch to what could become a really great season. And I love it, but I lament the fact that that's where I think Enterprise should have been.
Well, the challenge with it, of course, is that it's a late season 2 episode. And so we already had a whole bunch of the series under our belt at that point, right? I mean, A.G. Robinson didn't exist in anyone's heads when they were doing season 1. So it's a little bit unfortunate that you can't sort of do a little bit of Stalinist revisionism and go back and recreate all that. But it's always interesting to think about what might have been and how we could have had a show like that. Well, I look forward to watching it, and maybe by the time this episode drops, I'll have seen it, and people can check out my live tweets to see what I thought of it. Now, this next one is an unusual pick, Norman. An unusual pick, which we love here at the Trek Profiles podcast, because you picked something that isn't even a canonical episode, which always makes me happy. So here you picked Star Trek Continues. You picked the episode Lolani, also notable for having the wonderful guest stars of Aaron Gray and Lou Ferrigno in it, which is just spectacular. So I feel like I should give just a brief description, because maybe with most of the episodes that we talk about, my listeners will be familiar with it. But Star Trek Continues was basically a fan film production with really the highest possible production values that they could get. And what they were trying to do was to basically film the last season of TOS, right? For year 5 of the 5-year mission. And in this particular episode, they come across a renegade, or I don't want to say renegade, but let's just say a female Orion refugee. Yeah, is a good term. And she's off on her own on a ship, and they're trying to figure out what happened to her. How did she get here? And it turns out, of course, that she had killed the previous people who were on this shuttlecraft, or this small transport ship. And eventually, her owner comes looking for her. And that's really what the episode's about, is sort of the interplay there. And what does this say if we let her go with him? Is this permissible? Is it ethical? Is it the right thing to do? Is it the right thing to do to stop him? And our characters sort of grapple with this idea. And that's kind of the episode in a nutshell. Did I leave out anything critical, Norman?
No, I don't think so. Not from a narrative standpoint. I mean, you pretty much got that all. And what I think that is very striking about this episode is that it's one of the few fan film projects, and because this is so specifically based in the TOS era, not a lot of the fan film projects, at least for me, really find the core and the heart of the original series. Why Lolani, I felt, was so powerful is because of the plea that she makes to Kirk and Spock that she needs to be the voice for the oppressed because no one else right now has the opportunity to do so. Now Lolani has the audience of Starfleet, of Captain Kirk, of Mr. Spock, of Chancellor McKenna. Mm-hmm. She says to them and pleads to them that there are so many of my fellow Orion women that are being oppressed, that don't have a voice. I could be that voice for them. I could do this if you let me go, if you give me asylum. But Spock, on the other hand, he turns and he says, we do not involve ourselves in the politics of other governments. And that's the quandary. That's the conundrum, because this is a person who's seeking help, who's seeking protection, who because of the bruising on her and because what you have seen in your Vulcan mind meld, that she has been abused, she's been tortured, she's been enslaved, she's been oppressed, and so have so many other people. But why would they feel that their hands are tied in trying to save her, to try to liberate her from Zamenhof, that was Lou Ferrigno's character? And I just thought the performances really kind of like struck at the heart of the original series. I could have easily seen this on, as a Desilu production. I could have easily seen that because it resonated so strongly of the time, of the moral imperative that was always at the heart of the best original series episodes. And the performances were phenomenal. The performances were just so true to the characters, and I was just blown away by that could be done in a fan production. Just blown away.
It really is just a testament to not just the technical skill that it took to make something that looks like TOS. I mean, if you just gave it a glance, it looks exactly like TOS because they're using the original lenses. They're using a lot of the effects and a lot of the lighting and a lot of the other things they did to make it look like a TOS episode. So as a technical achievement, it's amazing, but they also captured, as you say, that ineffable quality that TOS had, where they were really dissecting and laying out on the table this ethical dilemma and really trying to live through the whole thing and play the tape out in the episode. Like, where do we go with this? What happens if we allow this? What does it mean? What would be the end result of this, right? And what would be the second and third order effects if we start to do this thing routinely, right? Because you have to look at those in addition to the thing that's right in front of your face. And those can cause bigger problems and lead to other issues that we see in the future. So it really is just a spectacular thing that anybody can watch on YouTube. And I would encourage them certainly to do that, especially if you're a TOS fan. It's really just magical. I feel like we have to spoil it, though, Norman, and actually talk about at the end of the episode what Lolani does is she is, of course, given back to Zamenhof, I believe his name is. Mm-hmm. And she ends up basically blowing up her own ship and killing herself and her owner and using that as basically an opportunity to broadcast a call for help. Right. And to sacrifice herself to bring attention to the plight of the Orion slaves. Mm-hmm. And it's just really a beautiful and powerful moment in the episode. Certainly something that in the MissionLog way, I think stands the test of time as a message for people. But one of the critiques that I've heard of people like me, and I suspect you as well, who are TOS fans, is that a lot of these episodes are asking questions that have already been answered, and it doesn't profit us necessarily to go back and revisit these things that we already know. Mm-hmm. So what's the value in an episode like this, Norman, when there's new things that we should be examining, and there's new Star Trek, which is giving us new ethical dilemmas, which are much more interesting and of the moment and much more relevant to people today? Why should we even care about this?
Well, I don't think that there's really, I don't think there's an expiration date on understanding morality. especially when you want to explore all the different, stylizations and permutations and interpretations of Star Trek. Some people that have never been exposed to the original series may find that their viewing habits trend on YouTube, and they might find, Star Trek continues organically, and they might find this episode and come away with something very profound from it. And I think that that's just another channel or an avenue for people to understand that, in a certain way and shape and form, even aesthetically, if it just represents the original series, you can still overlay this with any other Star Trek and still come out with this message that there is an issue with oppression, there is an issue with slavery, there is an issue with the oppression of rights, the degradation of human being, or not in this case, just a degradation of sentient beings. I don't think that that's necessarily mutually exclusive to any other Star Trek, even though that it has been explored in other series before or after. But at the same time, though, it's done in a way where the performances are really at the heart of the matter. And it's the performances of the lead actress who really sells the desperation of this character, and the resolution at the end of her martyrdom allows the Federation to investigate what's going on, because her loudest voice is silence, her silencing herself to bring more awareness to what has happened. She had to go that far in order for Kirk to take a position of making the Federation aware of what happened. So I think that in and of itself is, like I said, it doesn't have an expiration date on the quality of that storytelling.
Norman, let's take a look at some TOS episodes, since we seem to be in that vein, talking about Star Trek Continues, which is very much in the flavor of TOS. Let's talk about one of the classics that the M5 has picked for us. No, it's not The Ultimate Computer. He's always trying to put that one on the list. I'm not sure why. But let's talk about TOS, The Doomsday Machine. Certainly a remarkable episode. In my mind, notably, the performance of William Wyndham is just incredible. The nuance in that performance, it's glorious. But I'm curious what in this particular episode commends it to your attention.
Well, I've said this earlier about my best friend Todd and I. We went to Star Trek Las Vegas together. He cosplayed as Matt Decker. The Doomsday Machine is his favorite episode, and we've watched that ad nauseum. But more to your point, John, what I love about this episode is that where you saw, say, Jellicoe being this very measured, very disciplined, very put together captain. This is what Matt Decker wasn't, or he was a Commodore, of course, but he was broken, and he didn't understand why he was so hell-bent on his white whale. He was Ahab in this episode. And I think it was a cautionary tale to Kirk. Like, if Kirk became too obsessive about any one thing, he had the power and the capacity in his starship to be able to exact his revenge or to seek justice in that frontier way that TOS is most famous for, that cowboy diplomacy kind of way. So, he had to put himself at odds with, his superior officer and his friend. And you also got to see, like, Kirk is not just a captain of a starship. He knows his starships from the ground up. The way he was able to get Decker's ship moving again, the way that he was still in command of not only his ship and the discipline of his people, but a one-man crew basically working from the auxiliary bridge, on Decker's ship. So I just find that this entire dynamic of him trying to actually be the one enforcing the rules versus Decker using his ability to usurp the rules was a really interesting dichotomy in terms of, if I had enough authority, if I had enough power, and if I was not really altogether, what could a starship captain do in this situation? He had literally the power of the gods at his whim, and no one was really there but himself to stop it because he ended up he martyred himself because he was so bent on revenge. And in a sense, you could take that to the logical conclusion of, say, the Wrath of Khan, because that's where Kirk was. Kirk, he could have gone the way of, no, I'm going to kind of counter Khan's strategy with my own type of vengeance against him for doing all of these things that he's done to me, by hunting me down, by crippling my ship, by stealing the Genesis device. But no, I have to take the more reasoned approach, and try and get my crew and my ship out of this. It's only by sacrifice that Kirk was able to cheat death. But, that's something that Decker wasn't able to do because his judgment was just far too clouded.
In the two revenge scenarios that you talk about, Norman, the thing you have to keep in mind in the Doomsday Machine is that the machine is a machine. Mm-hmm. Its motivations are programmatic. It's entirely deterministic, right? It doesn't have agency, really, in its own way, right? Whereas Khan does have agency. He's driven mad eventually, but he does have a point that Kirk never sent anyone to check on them. He mentions this, right? That the Admiral could have come back and checked on our progress, seen what was going on. Instead, they just left us here, and that was it, right? And when you think about what you actually owe to people that you have dominion over, it certainly is reasonable to say we should send a survey every once in a while back to check on these people and see what's going on, even if just to make sure they're not about to build spacecraft and go and invade the universe, right?
As these people were able to do if they had the means, for sure.
Yeah. Even if just to keep an eye on and make sure nothing bad happens. So he does have a point. So I find that the revenge scenario in Wrath of Khan, I think, speaks to me a little bit better. But there is this timeless sort of Ahab, Moby Dick story here that I really do like. And one of the things that you, I think, correctly identify is that the best thing about it is the comparison of the captains, right? Which is something that also came up when we were talking about chain of command, which is that because we see this other captain who's completely different, right? It helps us to understand how our captain is how he or she is. And that it's that contrast that's really interesting. I feel like, in a way, Wyndham is sort of the captain that Kirk might have been if a few butterflies had flapped his wings a little bit differently. Mm-hmm. And I really appreciate thinking that way. There's some fans out there who might strenuously disagree with that and say, no, Kirk is like, he's the man, and he would never have these problems. But I feel like it's interesting in our heads to sort of think about what scenario could have occurred to have made that happen.
Well, if, say, Kirk beamed all of his crew down to a planet that no longer exists, what would it have done to them? We never saw Decker prior to that. We only saw the after effects of the complete destruction of his crew and his ship. And he was responsible for them. Very much like Kirk was responsible. That's why I picked these two. I picked Doomsday Machine and Balance of Terror because Kirk was responsible for the entirety of his ship and crew. And if he made a mistake in the neutral zone, they probably would have disavowed all of his actions and put his file in a black folder in Section 31 and just locked it away because he was in violation of treaty. So the heavy weighs the crown of command.
Oh, absolutely. It's something I think that people can't appreciate until you're in the job. As part of my work, I have had many a conversation with frontline workers who were thinking about applying for supervisor jobs. And very often not just very often, it's easy and natural in a role like that where you've never been in leadership and you're in a frontline position in any kind of organization to say, if I was in charge, here's what I would do, right? And here's how I would be different. Then you get in the role and you discover that 80% of the job is hidden from you. There's things and stresses and things that you're dealing with that you didn't know about or have any access to. And you don't necessarily know about those things till you're in it. So now you're in it and now you're dealing with that. And sort of all this other stuff that you were planning on doing, it becomes very difficult to execute on that unless you have a clarity of vision about why you're there and what you want to do. So I think it's a really nice leadership lesson, too, to think about that stuff. But that's just me because the work that I do, that stuff always comes to the top of my head. I want to ask you about one more TOS episode, and then we'll move on to some Berman era stuff. Yeah,
sure.
You're laughing. I'm not sure why you're laughing. Let's find out. I want to ask you about TOS Spectre of the Gun.
Yes, sir.
Goodness gracious, Norman. This is very, very, very rarely mentioned on Trek Profiles. So I feel like there's something special in this episode that you've keyed into that speaks to you, and I want to know what that is.
Well, I don't mention this a lot, but one of my favorite fandoms of all time is Westerns. I love Westerns. I love the Western genre. I love the good guys and the bad guys. I love one of my favorite Westerns of all time is The Magnificent Seven. It's funny, the thing is that usually the good guys wear white and the bad guys wear black. In this case, Yul Brynner wears all black. And to his credit, it was so iconic, they even borrowed it for his Westworld movie because he was dressed up in the exact same costume. What I always liked about Westerns is that there's just this great romantic exploration of the frontier, in this case, the Wild West. But in Spectre of the Gun, I was able to get Star Trek and the OK Corral gunfight in the same episode. And what I love about this episode is they make no apologies about it. It's been written up as fact, is that they were severely under budget in this season. They had to do the facades and write them as fragments of Kirk's memory or the memory of his barbaric past, because they couldn't afford to build entire sets. So I found that to be not only creative, but true. And I think that just fits perfectly. But at the same time, though, you had this great away team camaraderie. Then they all came together, and Spock was able to give them beyond a shadow of a doubt that what they were doing was a test. But what I love about this episode, very much like to say what the Metrons were doing with Kirk and Arena, is that the Melkotians here are using like Kirk's past. They've mined kind of like the memories of his barbaric past and turned it into this test to see if they are worthy enough to be able to be let go, because the Melkotians like kept them trapped in kind of like this nether region of space. Mm-hmm. But it's just it's a fun episode. There is a moral to it. It is laden with production issues that have been incorporated into the script. I thought it was very creative. And I just love the fact that they fought at the OK Corral against the Earp brothers and Doc Holliday, and it was the Clantons and Ike and Billy and the Claibornes, and it just felt like what you would see in a 1960s-esque Western, but in Star Trek. It's a guilty pleasure of mine, and I make absolutely zero apologies for it.
Well, I think it is one of the amazing strengths of Star Trek, is that you could turn it on every week in the TOS era, and I think even in the TNG era, in the Berman era too, and you never knew what kind of episodes you were going to get. I mean, you literally could get a comedy. You could get a space battle action show. You could get a Western. And we got everything kind of in between in a lot of these episodes. I mean, you go look at A Fistful of Datas, it's sort of the same thing, right? It's always up to whatever the programmers at the local TV stations decided to show us that week back in the day when you and I were coming up watching Star Trek.
I mean, like, as far as Enterprise, you had North Star. I mean, that was Western-esque. So... I'm sorry. Right. I shouldn't spoil your viewing.
No, it's fine. Like I said, I'd seen them all, but I don't remember a lot of it. There's a few of them that I've had to rewatch, and there's a few that I never forgot. Like Carbon Creek is an episode that always stayed fresh with me, and it's actually one that I consider to be the very best of all Star Trek. It's in my if I had a top 10 list, it would be in it for sure. So it is one of the things I enjoy about Spectre of the Gun too, and it's also, I think, an example of where sometimes the constraints of production force them to do better. Mm-hmm. That I think like sort of the weird abstraction of the whole episode works in its favor in a lot of ways. And if they'd had all the money to do the sets, would the episode have been that much better? I'm not sure. I'm not sure. But I think it's almost like that art by the limitations of the budget had them work better than if they'd had the money to do anything they'd imagined. But that's my point of view on it. So let's talk about some Berman era Trek. Let's talk about one particular episode. Let's talk about Deep Space Nine, The Visitor. Mm-hmm. An episode that doesn't have any space battles, doesn't really have a lot of phaser blasts, photon torpedoes, rip-roaring action, blowing stuff up. It's about an author, mm-hmm. and he's talking to a young lady in his living room and talking about his life. That's pretty much the episode, and I don't think I left anything out. And a lot of people consider it to be one of the best episodes of Star Trek. So tell me why this particular episode is special to you, Norman.
Well, I think on the surface, if you had to make a pitch for the show and you were writing kind of like a several word synopsis of it, I think you're right. You're right. It's about an author. It's about a young lady who tries to find him and try to discover why he stopped writing. On the surface, that's pretty much how it plays out. But in actuality and in its depth, it's about a father and a son. In this case, it's about Jake Sisko and Benjamin, and what Jake has suffered because of an accident that happened in real time. It happened on the Defiant, and Jake has suffered the trauma and the tragedy of having to live with surviving after his father and not having his father there to share his successes. And the reason why this episode is personal to me, and I told a similar story on MissionLog when I did The Visitor, which was like my second episode I did, or my third episode, which was, wow, that was trial by fire. So my father, the same father who took me to Wrath of Khan in 1982, my father passed away in 2010 after a 2-year bout with leukemia. My father was my hero. He was my world. He was everything to me. And when I watch this episode, I can see what Jake suffered at the loss of his father, who was his hero and his leader and his pillar of strength and his inspiration. And I identify with this episode a lot because there are parts of my life, especially in my professional career, where I've achieved certain milestones that in my company that are at the top level awards, Employee of the Year, things of that nature. And these all happened after my father's death, and I couldn't share those experiences with him. And it's very difficult for me to try and reconcile, even to this day, because when you have somebody in your life that has shaped your life so profoundly, not being able to close that circuit leaves something open and something undescribable, like inside of you, that it's just there. Whether you want to call it an absence of joy, a smile that doesn't really quite smile as widely as you used to. My partner, Carol, who I've been with for 20 years, she was there and supported me throughout this whole process of trying to reconcile, my feelings with my father's loss. I told her at this stage in the game, I can only really describe it as that I'm not really 100% of myself anymore. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's where Jake was in this episode, because no matter how many accolades he received from being an author and writing his books and becoming famous, it didn't matter to him, right? It didn't matter to him because Benjamin wasn't there to be by his side and share those moments, those milestones in his life. Getting married, possibly having children, going through all the things that you should be going through, with this person who means so much to you. And it's very difficult for me to watch that episode to this day, because it helps resurface, or it helps stir up those feelings that sometimes I am at peace with and sometimes I'm not. And I just find this so emotionally powerful, so well written. Tony Todd is immaculate in this episode, in all the different phases of Jake's life, when he was a younger man to when he was dying at the end, saying that if I don't do this, you won't live. But that's not what a father wants for his child. He wants his child to succeed him and to be better than he ever was.
That's right.
But Jake couldn't get past that. He couldn't get past it. And in many ways, I can't get past it. But that's why I chose The Visitor. I think it's probably one of the most profound episodes of Star Trek I've ever watched. And I wouldn't say not a laser was fired, but it didn't have all of the cliche, bombastic, explosive moments that would be more memorable. This is about just an acting performance par excellence that is just so emotionally powerful that it withstands the test of time. To steal my own tagline, right? So, it's fantastic.
So it's interesting. We were talking before the episode began about what we were doing today and sort of chit-chatting before we began the official recording. And one of the things that had come up was I actually had my second COVID shot today. And I'm going to bring this around to Star Trek in just a minute. My wife and I went together, and we were waiting in a very long line. It took us about an hour and a half to get out for this. So it was just a lot of waiting. And for one reason or another, we ended up chatting about her father, whom I had the chance to know, and he had the chance to know me. But he was very much an old country gentleman. And Sometimes the way I might describe it is that it's a little bit like when you're dealing with your intended's father. It's always a difficult subject, but he in particular had a very old world sensibility about things because he was from the old country. And so when I went to ask him for permission to marry his daughter, of course, he told me no. He told me no 3 times, in fact. And he never quite got around on that. And he passed away before really he got to know me much more than that. And my own dad never got to meet my wife or meet my son. And I was mentioning today to my wife, I was like, that is my biggest regret, is that my father, who never approved of anything I did in my life, right? He never got to meet her or to meet my son, Whopper Jr. That's what I call him. And the comment I made was, here I am, a 49-year-old man, and I'm still obsessed with whether or not my father would have approved of what I'm doing. And it's not that it's even an interesting story about me, because it's not, but it's a true thing that sons are obsessed in many ways about their fathers. That is almost universally true, I found, in a lot of people, a lot of men that I've talked to, and a lot of friends that I have. And I think that's one of the powerful things about this episode, is that we have someone who essentially has a version of survivor's guilt, and in a way, commits a sort of suicide to undo it. And I found that disturbing in a lot of ways. It's actually a critique I have of the episode in a way, is I find that more unsettling than beautiful.
Yeah, it's a very powerful choice by Jake. And John and I talked about on the show that he did choose suicide in order to save his father. And it was just, that's I don't even have the words for it. I'm at a loss for words. It is powerful.
Yeah, because, you talk to a father and you say, what direction is this supposed to go, right? It's supposed to be a pay it forward type of situation, yeah. Right? When it comes to parents and children. And so it subverts that in a way which is sort of magical, powerful, and if you really look at it, disconcerting, which I think whenever you have really great art, that's an essential ingredient that has to be rolled into the burrito, making you uncomfortable in some way.
Well, it's a controversial decision, by the writers for that episode. But at the same time, though, it's one of those rare moments where Star Trek transcends itself as a brand in that episode, because you could literally strip out every single detail that is Star Trek in that episode, and it would still hold up as a fantastic story. That's when I think Star Trek is at its best, when it doesn't have to brand itself within its own show to make sure that you know that this quality entertainment is Star Trek. It's a story that is, it's in and of itself a quality piece of entertainment.
Norman, we've talked about the parameters of your fandom, your experience with Star Trek, which is lifelong at this point, going back to when you were a wee tot. You are going to Star Trek conventions. You have a uniform collection. You've signed up for MissionLog, which is basically a very, very long-term commitment with many hours a week of thinking about Star Trek, writing the recaps. I mean, it's just a lot of work putting out a podcast. People who don't do this don't understand what goes into this. I mean, it really is a lot.
It is.
Star Trek is obviously a very big part of your life. Why have you chosen to make this commitment? What is it about Star Trek that induces you to do this amount of work? Why do you care?
I think it's because, going all the way back to when I first started watching, I think it's because that it shapes me at different times of my life, and it gives me a certain perspective about things. The Star Trek fan that I was 30 years ago or 35 years ago isn't obviously the same Star Trek fan that I am now. And I've actually used Star Trek over the years to try and check myself when I felt like I wasn't going in the right direction, or I wasn't approaching situations with the right amount of care or forethought or open-mindedness or inclusiveness. Because we're all products of our surroundings. We're all products of our experiences at the time. What I love about Star Trek is that they're trying to show us that we aren't, because we're supposed to be embracing this this evolution and striving towards being a more optimal human being. What does that mean, though? What does that optimal mean? Because is it more tolerant? Is it more inclusive? Is it more embracing of certain people's beliefs, cultures, differences? Is it being more forgiving? Is it being more open-minded? Is it being more disciplined about and more measured about how you act and how you carry yourself in public? Yes to all of it to some degree, sometimes more so. But it allows me to be just a better person when I walk out the door. When I really think about, and this also was shaped in part with being a manager of people, because I have a team, I have a staff as a creative director, and when I look back at how I approached my, say my captaincy at work, when I was a much younger captain, I was not a good captain. I was a terrible captain because I felt like if you can't do it right, I'm going to have to do it because I do everything right. That's why I'm in this chair. And that's not the case. That is never the case. And when you come to that realization, that is when you have your best growth opportunity as a person, because you know that you can't do it on your own. You know that you have to trust the people that are with you, because we're all rowing the oars in the same direction. We are all moving in the same path, and we're all headed towards the same goal. We'll get there our way, but we will all get there eventually. And it's your job as a captain, it's your job as a human being to make sure that the people around you are lifted up as you are the tide that raises all boats. And if you do that right, if you embrace the strengths of everyone around you and know that their differences are what makes you stronger, then you have a better understanding of how to move forward as a human being, because you know that I don't have it all figured out. And it's wonderful when other people bring those solutions to the table that help you realize that I have been missing out on so much because I thought I had it all figured out. And that's always been Star Trek to me. It's always the lesson that I've pulled from Star Trek. That's what makes it unique above all the other fandoms that I watch. Some great science fiction is just about the adventure. Some of it's about this, and some of it's about that. But Star Trek has always been about, at its core, what happens when a group of people allow each other to be the best versions of themselves, and in turn make their friends and their comrades and their coworkers the best versions of themselves by pointing out the fact that you can't do it alone. And I think that once people embrace that and understand that and look back on their lives, you'll be like, you know what? I had opportunities for growth that I didn't take. And now that I understand that, that's the closer to a Star Trek person that we're trying to achieve to be.
Norman, I have enjoyed our conversation. But I have to tell you that the M5 is signaling me that it is now time for the Kobayashi Maru.
Oh.
The Kobayashi Maru is a challenging and difficult test, cunningly prepared by the M5 Multitronic unit. Should you not only survive the test, but pass it as well, the M5 will award you an honorary Star Trek title on behalf of our little show here. Are you ready to face the Kobayashi Maru, Norman?
Yes. I have not had a chance to program the M5, so...
M5, load the Kobayashi Maru simulation and prepare to record Norman's responses.
Working.
Who's after you, the Xindi or the Emerald Chain?
The Xindi.
Choose your Federation penal colony, Elba 2 or Jaros 2.
Elba 2.
Who is more cunning, Satan's robot or the M5 Multitronic unit?
The M5 Multitronic unit.
What's for dinner, tomato soup, Bolian style, or Caterpod stew?
Bolian style soup.
Which is the tougher opponent, the Doomsday Machine or a Borg cube?
The Doomsday Machine.
Simulation complete. M5, compute the results and tell us if our guest has passed the Kobayashi Maru.
Analyzing results.
Norman, I am pleased to tell you that the M5 has calculated that you have passed the Kobayashi Maru simulation. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you, M5.
And now, the M5. Oh, he's very shy. He doesn't talk too much. And now, the M5, who has analyzed your answers, will award you an honorary Star Trek title on behalf of our podcast. M5, tell us, what title shall we award our guest?
Norman Lao is awarded the title of Lecturer in Classic Weapons and Swordplay at the University of Alpha Centauri.
So there you go.
I'm honored.
There you go, because I knew you're a sword guy.
I
so
am,
I knew you would appreciate that. Norman, if people who are listening to this are somehow unfamiliar with MissionLog, please tell them why they should listen and where they can find you and how they can follow you personally if they want to continue the conversation.
Well, MissionLog is a rodandberry.com podcast where my co-host, John Champion, and we talk about Star Trek one episode at a time, from the original series all the way to Enterprise, when we eventually get there, and we look at the morals and meanings and messages of every episode and talk about the synopsis of the episode. We talk about some of our observations, and we take a look at it from a very critical perspective. So if you haven't listened to MissionLog, I highly encourage you to do so. And if you want to start all the way back from the beginning, then you'll hear the original co-host voice, Ken Ray, with John Champion as they took on the original series, The Next Generation, and Deep Space Nine Seasons 1 through 3.
Wonderful. Tell people briefly about your Zocalo cast.
Okay, so the Zocalo cast is one of my side projects that I do with Charlene Schmidt, and it is a live YouTube, I guess it's a live YouTube production in a way that talks about all the different aspects of Babylon 5. It is not, say, a chronological order type of show. We talk about some of the deeper issues. We talk about some of the frivolous issues. As a matter of fact, in the last episode that we did, we talked about what we believe were the top most despised characters of Babylon 5. And you would be surprised at that list, John. You would be surprised. So that is a show that I do out of a labor of love. It is something that we do every week. We do that and this is Pacific Standard Time, on Sundays at 4 p.m. And if you want to join us, you can just find us on YouTube at the Zocalo Live Cast. So you can find us there.
Norman, but we've talked about your various shows, but where can people follow you personally?
So you can follow me personally online. I am on Twitter and I am on Instagram at Lounge Lizard. That's L-A-O. That's my last name. L-A-O-N-G-E Lizard. And you can find me on MissionLog. If you want to email me, you can email me at norman@rodandberry.com. And you can also find me on MissionLog on our main website. And then, of course, on our podcast feeds, you can find me there as well.
And we will have links to all that on the show notes page at TrekProfiles.com. Norman, thank you so much for being part of Trek Profiles. I really appreciate it, man.
Oh, we had a great time. I'm really glad that you gave me and extended the opportunity to come on your show. And I hope to do this again sometime soon with Babylon 5.
Here ends this installment of the Trek Profiles podcast. And before we offer a Trek quote to close this episode, I'd like to remind you that you may send us your friendly feedback, your blistering, blazing billet doux of bombast, recordings of your latest holodeck fanfics featuring Minnie Riker to feedback@trekprofiles.com or on Facebook or Twitter at Trek Profiles. Anything you send us can be used in the show, or it might be sent directly to the penal colony on Rurapente. This time, I leave you with a quote from Captain Archer, who said to Admiral Forrest in the episode First Flight, quote, "We didn't build this engine to make test runs around Jupiter, we built it to explore. If my father were alive today, he'd be standing here asking, what the hell are we waiting for?" Close quote. Thanks for listening, and live long and prosper.
This handcrafted podcast is brought to you by Stars and Sky Media Lab. It's cosmic.
Are you on our Discord?
Yes, I have joined the Discord, although I haven't actually Discorded, but I have joined it.
It's fun. It's just a fun, goofy get together. It's just, I think that people are a little bit more, comfortable using that than, say, just going on social media and putting themselves out there. And sometimes it's not very fun for people, to get hit with the fandom toxicity sometimes. You know how it is.
Yeah, I know. I get it, man. It's a private space, and you're able to manage it much better.
Yeah, for sure. Oh, I dig your pullover, man. I always loved the Golden Knights logo. I think it's brilliant.
Well, I love the team, and I'm all about the Golden Knights. I have never been a sports ball fan, and couldn't even have told you the first thing about it until the Golden Knights came here, and then I went all in a big way. Nice. But it's because the guy who owns it, Foley, he's a big Army guy, and so everything has to have like a West Point reference, and they're the Black Knights.
Okay.
So that's his thing, is like everything has to refer to West Point in some way. So it didn't matter what kind of team he bought. It was going to have some kind of name that was illustrative of his favorite team. So we are the Golden Knights, which doesn't seem a particularly Vegas thing. I thought we would have had like something a little more Sin City, but it's something that I don't really get hung up on. So
I love the V, the subtle highlights in it to show that it's the V for Vegas. I love that logo. I'm a big logo guy, so
that's cool.
Yeah.
Are you one of those people that like whatever age you were when you first figured out that there's a hidden logo inside the FedEx logo that like now you can't stop seeing it?
The arrow? Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's like my business, my profession. For the last 25-ish years has been creative. So logo design and all that kind of stuff is, it's in today's day and age, we're all about icons, so the more clever the icon and the less convoluted, the better, so you have to tell a story in like seconds or less. Right? In a logo.
Oh, man. Trust me, I know. I sweated that when I was trying to come up with the logos and all the, creative for my podcast, because I'm not a graphics guy. I do the audio stuff for the most part. I edit all the episodes, most of the episodes. Every now and then I've gone outside when I'm pressed for time, but I do most of the work myself. When it came to the graphics and art, I was like, nah, I'm out. So I actually ran a contest on, I don't remember, maybe it was Fiverr, where you could put a brief together and you deposit money in escrow so they know you're not going to stiff them.
Oh.
And what happens is like designers can pitch, right? So they come up with like a mock-up, based on your brief.
Yeah.
And then you select it, and then they produce all whatever assets you said you wanted. Like I need 14 logos of this size with this shape. I need a banner of this size, this shape.
Oh, wow.
Like I need a Twitter banner. I need a Facebook logo. I need a Twitter icon. I need a, whatever. And they just make all the, different assets off whatever you finally pick.
Oh, that's interesting.
So that's actually where it came from, where my little L-Cars style logo came from. I liked it because it was simple.
It tells a good story, and I think it's really clever. Yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate that. 4 colors,
Well, they're the colors, right?
And you're done. Yeah, a little. They're similar. Yeah. But it's good enough for what I do. It
works, man. It works.
So,
you're all dialed in, man.
I try to be. I don't know. I put up a good front. I put up a good front because this is entirely like a back pocket operation here at Trek Profiles. I don't do. I don't have a store. I don't have a supporters program. I don't have Patreon. I don't have anything. So is
that something you don't want to do? Is it too much of a hassle for you, or
I don't want to sell anything. You know what it is, Norman? It is like I feel like if people gave me money for this. I feel like it would put an obligation on me.
Yeah, I get it.
And right now, I just offer everything on a take it or leave it basis. Right? Yeah. The only thing I do is once a year is I ask that if you like the show and if you want to show your support, and if you're in a position to do so, I have a charity that I support, and I have a special GoFundMe link that goes directly to them. Right? I'm not in the middle of it. It just so I say send them $5.
Right.
That's the great thing you can do. It's a genetic condition my wife has. Okay. So I talked about it on one of the episodes. So I said you can just go support that, and send them a couple bucks, and that would mean the world to me.
Oh, that's cool, man.
Sure. I get it, man. That's what this is, right? This is my outlet for the fandom because this is what I do, right? Yeah. My kid doesn't have too much of an interest in Star Trek. He'll watch some of the newer stuff with me. My wife has zero interest in anything sci-fi, so this is what I do.
Opposite attract. I love it, man. There you go.
Yeah, she likes what she calls cute movies, and if it doesn't. If it's not considered a cute movie, she's sort of not interested. And like cute movies would be things like Sex and the City, most things with Vince Vaughn, or stuff like that. So that's what she likes, which is great, but it's just not my bag. So
I get it.
Yeah, it's going to be a crazy week. Today's been crazy, and it's going to be a crazy week because we're going on vacation tomorrow.
Oh,
and we're renting an RV and we're driving up to Lake Tahoe.
Okay,
and we're just going to hang out at the RV park and look at the water and go outside and do some hiking. That's it. So
that's good for now.
Yeah, that's it. There's no heavy duty travel or any, no like airports or bus terminals or anything like that.
Right.
So we'll see what movies I'll be subjected to during evening entertainment.
Have you been vaccinated yet? Or are you going?
I got my second shot today.
Oh, good for you, man. Good for you.
Got my second shot today. Yeah. That's why today was so crazy.
Okay.
I was running around getting crazy for getting everything ready for the trip tomorrow, and I had to. In fact, just before I got on with you, I had to run out and get some steaks because we're going to grill when we're up there. So I just came back to the grocery store, and we had our COVID jabs today, and I had to finish up everything at work to get everything secured so I could leave it alone for a week.
Sure.
So yeah, because it's spring break, so the kids out of school. We had to do something, and my wife and kid especially, they were just like, "I've been cooped up in this house too long. We got to do something."
I get it, man. I totally get it. Yeah, I understand. The other night, I was out with one of my senior vice presidents. I've been working with this man for over 20 years, and I do a lot of his presentations and graphic design work and things like that, and. It's the first time I've been out in a restaurant since COVID, like an actual, went out to a table. It was outdoors and, everyone was, adequately spaced apart, but it was strange just being out there, just kind of sitting in that public space.
Feels weird, doesn't it?
It does in a way, and in between, in between the courses, we kept our masks on, and obviously we took them off when we were eating, but it was just kind of looking around and everyone's doing the same thing. And I'm like, hey, you know what? I think, there was a certain level of responsibility that was being respected amongst all the people. And I think that was good. It was definitely good for me because I was like, this is good. A good meal, man. I haven't had a hot meal for dinner because I'm in my Airbnb right now. As you can see, I'm not in my studio per se, but, I usually just do cold foods here, and a good hot meal and literally an epic bottle of wine was fantastic.
Oh, that sounds great. No, we've had restaurants here, but it's been, everything has been socially distant, and, some places you might have to wait a while. But it still feels a little weird. It certainly does, when all that, half the tables are shut down, and it's just, I don't know. It's just I don't think things will ever get back. It'll never be like the before times.
I understand it. And Joe Straczynski, he said this, I can't remember in what interview, but he said that there are maybe a handful of moments in your life that you would designate as the it moments, life before it and life after it. That this whole thing is that it moment for us, for the world. There's life before it, and there's going to be life that has to change after it. And, it's profound, especially when it, is a globally affecting situation like this is.
And if you cannot confess, our interrogatories will come to an end.
Okay.
So that is the
agonizer, always, please.
Yes, your agonizer, please. That is always the first question.
Yeah, that's usually kind of like what that tar pits the process. Most of the time it's like, hey, I got a bunch of stuff I want to get out, but I got to edit them, and that's just adds to procrastination like tenfold. To get those out.
That's the other reason I only do about one episode a month.
Yeah.
But I will say that my episodes tend to be long. So I think the one I pushed out today was 2.5 hours.
Okay.
The longest one I ever did, which was a very special case because it wasn't a single guest. But I pushed out a 5-hour podcast one time.
Wow.
But it was called My Podcasting Extravaganza, and it was actually like 5 guests.
Oh, wow.
Because what happens is because this is the kind of show I do, that's basically this is your life in Star Trek. Mm-hmm. You don't get to come back. Right. Yeah. I mean, you're on it once. You've talked about the things that matter to you the most in Star Trek. We don't really get a take 2 of that. Right.
Right. Yeah.
So I was looking for a way to have people come back that wouldn't break the format of the show. And for my 2-year anniversary, people had been asking me John, are you ever going to do you're the guest on Trek Profiles? And that's when I said, that's what I'm going to do is I flipped it. And I invited former guests to come back, and I gave them an episode to talk to me about.
Oh, cool.
So it was basically, and because there were so many separate guests, it turned into a 3-parter podcast. It's 10 hours of content.
Oh, wow.
Because, if you and I, if we've talked about 4 episodes and the 5th one, you're like, I don't even, this one, I just love it so much. Okay, great. We only spent 5 minutes on it. But if you're coming on to talk about that one episode, I'm going to get 30 minutes out of you. Right. Mm-hmm. So the time just grew. But that was my podcasting extravaganza. So don't worry, we're not doing anything like that.
Right. Well, before we start, then, knowing the time frame, I'm going to go take a bio break.
Yeah, do that.
Get myself ready, and away we go.
Okay. Yeah, I used to have a rule called the John Champion rule, which was that his was the longest episode I ever did. And I was like, no one else can be long. I think his was like 3 hours and 20 minutes or something.
Oh my God.
And I was like, that's the longest one I can possibly do. And then I ended up breaking it like several times. So
that's funny. It's a champion podcast for sure.
Yeah, it was. But his picks all had a theme, which was very interesting. But anyway, we're here to talk about you. Now, do you know what Satan's robot is?
I don't remember.
That is from Bride of Chaotica.
Oh, of course. I just saw that episode, but it's not in my memory banks.
I've been following your stuff, and I was like, oh, I'm definitely going to put Satan's robot in this. And so...
Because I think of like the robot in that episode, I keep thinking of this, the robot that Paris fixed, or that Paris fix is like the robot, the old stodgy one. Yeah, but Satan's robot, yeah.
Yeah. By the way, a huge shout out to whoever on Memory Alpha did the profile for Satan's robot, because it says purpose, serving the overlords of evil. I think it's actually like what it says.
I was just so blown away by the black and white quality of that episode and kind of like the homage they did to Buster Crabbe's Flash Gordon. I was just
Isn't it just
myself.
Majestic?
Amazing. It's amazing.
I swear, I would watch an entire show, a Captain Proton show. I would watch the whole thing. Just sign me up.
I suggested this to Shar because she's a huge Voyager fan. I said, wouldn't it be great? Because I know that I know that Robbie Duncan McNeil wants to get one off the ground, but it would be great if they actually did it radio style form for an audiobook or an audio podcast.
Oh, like they're doing for that Space 1999 one right now.
Yeah. But like with all like and here comes Captain Proton with his trusty sidekick about to take over the galaxy and rid the planet of evil. That kind of thing, right?
Here'd be the key for the sound design. They cannot use modern sound effects.
Exactly.
They have to do everything like Foley style, like old school, banging wood boards together, nothing digital.
Exactly.
Right?
So that it would be the analog of a true Captain Proton episode.
Glorious. No, I'm there, man. I would sign up for that.
Right. Let's
maybe that's the special Voyager surprise that they're going to give us in the Voyager documentary that they're raising money for. They'll give us some Captain Proton.
That would be amazing.
I would. Yeah. Oh God, I would die. I would literally fall over dead. That's it. I'd be dead. You'd have to carry me out of the theater. Like I don't think I could handle it.
Hey man, you reach the peak right there. You reach the summit of the mountain when you see that.
Oh yeah. Man, that would just be too much. Well,
cool, man. Hey, man, really, thank you so much. It was great to get to know you, and just kind of chillax and share stories and figure out where our fandom's going and how we can help it.
I know it's really weird, isn't it? It's really weird because you see these people online and it's always like these sort of shadow simulacrums of what they're really like, right? And you get to actually meet people and talk to them in a format like this, and you get to really know them. And that's what I love about this, right? Because it's all about the people. I've worked in lots of places and I love the work, but what I always miss is the people. It's the humans, right? And that's the thing that I miss. And that's what I love about this, is getting to talk to incredible people such as yourself and learning about their stories and this thing that we all share, which is the love of science fiction, Babylon 5, Star Trek, whatever it is, and just diving in. It's been enormously rewarding, which is that's why I don't need a Patreon, is because the reward is the people that I interview, truly. And that feeling that I get when I hit the launch button on the episode, which I get to, I don't know how your technical stuff works. I imagine you're not actually publishing the episodes yourself.
John publishes on Libsyn, and then it gets fed out to all the other. I used to do all the publishing and stuff like that for our own shows on Trek FM, but John spearheads all that stuff.
So it's like a really weird feeling when I press that button, and even though nothing happens, it's the most anticlimactic thing when you hit publish, right? As you know, because you've done it, right? You hit publish and it just says publishing done, and you're like, all right. But I have this bizarre feel. In fact, I posted a GIF earlier today on Twitter. I don't know if you saw the Coming to America 2.
I have.
You have? Mm-hmm. Do you remember the scene where General Izzy comes in?
Oh, yeah, he's done.
Yeah, and he's like, yeah, I posted that GIF, and I was like, this is my feeling when I launch a new episode.
That's funny.
Right? It's like, I have that feeling, It's like I get so excited about every episode because I'm highlighting a remarkable person such as yourself that has a great story to tell about, their fandom. And it's so personally gratifying to me. That's why I couldn't do a show like MissionLog. Like, I couldn't talk to the same person over and over again. Like, even as someone as amazing as John or yourself, I think it would just, I don't know. I crave the variety, of hearing, of hearing the different stories. Yeah. So it's something that really does it for me.
Well, I thoroughly enjoyed myself, man. I really, it was a true pleasure. Thank you so much.
All right. Well, more to come.
All right, man. Hey.
All right. Take it easy.
Have a great vacation. Okay.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. Have a good one.
Enjoy yourself. Okay.
Bye.
Bye.